Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our post-cabinet press conference. It is a pleasure to introduce to you today our Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, who will address us.
Thank you very much, members of the media, members of the viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. I hope you've had a very restful and enjoyable Diwali weekend. What a difference a week makes, right? Last Thursday, I woke up on Thursday morning to a very special occasion, and I've been very happy from that Thursday into the weekend. I was celebrating my birthday, my 70th year, so it did mean something to me. It was my first birthday celebration. I've never had one before, actually. It was planned and executed with precision, and I'm sorry I couldn't invite the media because I might have been accused of trying to encourage you to be more favorable to me and my friends. But a good time was had by all friends and family in Tobago, and I took a decision at that gathering on the weekend that I really need to spend more time in Tobago, a lot of time, and I intend to do that going forward. But ladies and gentlemen, today, Thursday, 1 week later, I got up this morning and I saw two headlines in the newspaper. And I thought that today, in the scheme of things, as I have always done, which is to make myself available to the media and the public, so that wherever there's doubt, I can clarify. And this matter concerns my own actions, the matter to do with the Darrell Smith report and his demise as a Minister of Government. The headlines are cover up. And two of you, I think it's the Newsday and the Guardian, who apparently would have got access to a report which I had commissioned. Last week I was on the radio and Natalie Legault asked about this report, and I responded, quite openly and candidly what the facts were. And having stated the facts, I now see a question about cover-up. Well, let me, for the record, once again revisit this matter so that there can be no doubt that there is no cover-up on my part, and there is no cover-up in this government, and I have not done so, and I will not be doing so, not for myself or for anybody for that matter. What are the facts? The facts are that I appointed Darrell Smith as a Minister of Government in the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs. It came to my attention that Mr. Smith had issues with the conduct of his personal affairs at the ministry, and it involved the dismissal of a member of staff. I was unhappy with that information, and I took some corrective action. As a matter of fact, when I took that action, it was against the background that Mr. Smith had featured before in a weekend of frivolities in Tobago, which was a little excessive. And he was spoken to by me, and I indicated to him that that kind of newsmaking disturbing the public psyche is not advisable. So when the matter came to me about problems in the ministry and resulting in the dismissal of a member of staff because of his personal involvement with staff member, I, as Prime Minister, acted. I demoted Mr. Smith from Minister in the Ministry of Sport from Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs to Minister in the Ministry of Housing. Having done that, and that was announced, that was effected, having done that, it then came to my attention that there may be a bit more than what I had heard, and that his conduct may have been more serious than I was aware of, and I needed to further inform myself. To do so, and what I'm telling you here now is old news, because I did tell this to the media before. I asked Mr. Robinson Regis to go to the Ministry of Sport and talk to the permanent secretary there, talk to whoever is available and she wants to talk to, and report back to me as to the nature of the problem that existed there involving the conduct of the minister. That was done. And in my presence, in the presence of Minister Robinson Regis, who I brought in as a member of the cabinet to talk to Mr. Smith on this particular matter, he was questioned. And at that time, I was satisfied that Mr. Smith had to be removed as the minister in the Ministry of Sport. So he was completely removed from any executive authority. And the only position he holds is Member of Parliament, over which I have no control. He remains the elected Member of Parliament representing the people of Diego Martin West. He had been removed from any office in the government. I didn't stop there. Because of what I had heard and what appeared to be a complicated situation where some matter was going for further arbitration at the industrial court, there were allegations being made, lawyers were involved and so on, and of course every story has 5 sides. I selected a 3-person group, 3 very qualified people, experienced people who were suitable to do the job, and I announced that, and their terms of reference were made public, what they were going to do, and those persons agreed to go and do the examination and prepare a report. And of course, that report now would cover not just me talking to Mr. Smith and Mrs. Robinson Regis looking into Mr. Smith's conduct and so on. It was to look at the entire issue involving the public servants, because as you know, ministers can't spend government money. It has to involve the public service. And some money was spent in settlement of a claim for wrongful dismissal. And of course, as you know, a minister cannot dismiss anybody from the public service. It has to be done by the public service officers and so on. So the wrongful dismissal matter resulted in a payment being made in settlement of the claim and so on. This team was asked to look at the entire matter for the public interest and prepare a report. The ultimate sanction had already been applied to Mr. Smith. He was dismissed from the government in 2 tranches, dismissed as minister in a ministry, minister with a ministry, and from minister in a ministry. So there was absolutely no cover-up, and there was action taken by the Prime Minister. And of course, we awaited the report. The report, a draft report, was prepared, and it involved the officers who did the report talking to the various people, whoever they thought was relevant, and the report reflected very poorly on Mr. Smith. And report or no report, I had already been satisfied that I had to remove him, and I was done. When the report was had, it is now a matter, because it's public officers involved and so on, because the minister was now out of the loop in that way. The report then got to the permanent secretary, who made the report available to Mr. Smith for his comments. Because if there were any further action on the part of anyone, they had to be made aware of the existence of the report, and they would be given an opportunity to comment. The next thing that happened was that Mr. Smith, on receipt of this report from the permanent secretary, he would have seen what the report contained, and he would have seen what was said about him by certain people, known or unknown to him, and he sought legal advice and support. And his legal advisor, in referring to the permanent secretary, drew to the permanent secretary's attention that this report was compiled and findings were made against the lawyer's client, and Mr. Smith was of the view that he was not granted due process. He was not granted the opportunities of natural justice because no one had spoken to him to get his side of what was said about him and to get his side about what he can say about the motivating factor of the persons who had provided evidence to the committee and so on. So that being so, and it was confirmed that he was not spoken to by the compilers of the report. But they came to conclusions adverse to Mr. Smith without speaking to him. And the legal opinion, which was, the opinion had quite properly, because as well as sending the report to Mr. Smith for his comment, the report was sent to the Attorney General's office, because that's where the public servants would look for guidance. And the Attorney General went outside of his office and got independent advice as to what this means. And the legal advice that he got, I think senior counsel advice, he got senior counsel advice that those who did the report went too far without consulting Mr. Smith, and that would make the report unusable. And of course, it was said that, well, since they didn't talk to Mr. Smith, maybe they could talk to him now and we can get it on from there. Again, the legal advice is that then you open yourself to being, the persons would have been challenged for being biased, having come to conclusions before. And it's not a question of just talking to him now and saying, okay, it's rectified and therefore we can proceed. And that was, the bottom line is that the report was unusable for that fatal breach. And of course, the ultimate sanction had already been done. And of course, we've had examples of this before. We've had examples of a prime minister getting a report that was containing information that was adverse to a minister. That prime minister, senior counsel that she was also advised by the relevant parties in the ministry that that report ought not to be made public because it was being challenged by the minister who claimed that he was not given the opportunity to be heard. I hereby refer to the Arnell Roberts matter with live sport, which was a far more humongous matter than this one with Darrell Smith. It involved loss of life, it involves hundreds of millions of dollars, it involved a far larger number of people and so on. But the ministry had said that the report was not acceptable because Mr. Roberts was complaining that he was not party to the findings of the report. But lo and behold, the report then was made public. And Mr. Roberts was now able to go to court, sue the state, and of course he won, and the state had to pay serious liabilities and costs, and the report could not be used. So it would be crazy for me, in the face of that historical matter of recent vintage, to now be advised by senior counsel not to publish a report or to advise that the report is useless because it has breached Mr. Smith's rights to be heard, and then to make the report public. If I had done that, I would be the one now facing a different issue of what have you exposed taxpayers to. So I don't operate like that. But the important thing, what I had to do, I have done. And I did that early, before this report, which was to use the authority I had, the authority to appoint Mr. Smith. He was appointed, and the same authority, he was dismissed. I know of no other sanction that I could apply to Mr. Smith as Prime Minister dealing with a minister. The ultimate sanction had been applied. With respect to the report and its use and its uselessness, that is now a singular legal matter. And the one thing I don't do in law is advise myself. I am not a lawyer. You all may know I'm a geologist. I'm also a farmer. But I am not a lawyer, and I do not advise myself in law. And when I get legal advice that this report is not usable, I then have nothing to do with it. The permanent secretary sent it to the AG office. He got legal advice, and that's where it got. So I don't know where this cover-up is, but wherever it is not with me, it is not with my office, and it is not with the government. Right? There are issues raised in there with respect to Mr. Smith's situation. There are issues in there about the permanent secretaries. I think there was more than one permanent secretary involved. But again, when I looked at what I saw, the permanent secretaries had acted on available legal advice to dismiss. And that dismissal was found to be improperly handled, and therefore there was liability for the ministry. That's a fact. There's no running away from that. I saw Mr. Kwabida's name being mentioned in the matter. The ministry had gone outside and got the advice of an expert lawyer who deals with HR matters, because the wrongful dismissal case was an HR matter. And of course, the young lady was making a particular level of claim for wrongful dismissal. My understanding from the report I seen was that Mr. Kwamina acting had got the claim reduced substantially and got a settlement, and the figure that we're aware of is $150,000 as compared to what was being asked and so on. These are all legal matters between a claimant, a permanent secretary, an in-house lawyer advising the permanent secretary, an external lawyer advising. I am not a lawyer. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to cover up. Those are the facts. If you were able to get the report, as I see you've done, because since I spoke last week on the radio, I see you've been very resourceful, and you've got the report, and you've published some of what the report contained and so on. But that is not the whole story. And I simply want to say to you, there's no cover-up. I have nothing to hide, and in fact, I have acted quite expeditiously in dealing with a minister who was exposed to the kinds of allegations that were being made. And of course, allegations are not all and always facts. And of course, if it ever gets to another venue, a court of law, wherever it is, I am sure that Mr. Smith will have something to say for himself. So basically, that is this. I thought I would remind you of where this came from. And I know there are very many people who are excited about a cover-up and a scandal and so on. But I come before this podium on a very regular basis because I conduct myself as Prime Minister in such a way that I can say now without fear of contradiction that there has been no Prime Minister in this country who has been more open and available to the public and the media on all matters, this being one of them. So if you have any questions that you want to raise about it, I would respond, but just remember, I'm not a lawyer. Let me Anthony first.
Prime Minister, good afternoon and happy belated birthday.
Well, thank you very much.
You've spoken about various levels of conduct. I'm wondering if you could cast your mind to the conduct of the public servants who opted to go with a narrative that led to wrongful dismissal rather than the complaint about sexual harassment.
Well, that's where some of the confusion was. But again, I do know that what we did, again, I don't want to talk to the report, because if I talk to the report, then I'm using the report. So you understand my difficulty. But I can't say that I'm unaware. I'm aware, but I can't use it in talking to you here. But there was some, there was a finality. That was the dismissal. There was a dismissal of an officer. Okay? There were two sides to that story. One side was that the officer was non-performing. The other side was that the dismissed officer was saying, I was dismissed because of harassment. So that was, and that alone should have demanded that there be a response from the accused. Right? So that was in the pie there somewhere. And of course, but the bottom line, what the claim was that there was a dismissal and there was an acceptance that the dismissal, the way the dismissal was done, because if I seem to recall that the person who was dismissed The reason why the dismissal was deemed to be improper is that the person who was dismissed was also dismissed without process. Yeah. So you see my difficulty. That is why the ministry had to accept responsibility, because the dismissal by the public officials was a dismissal without proper process.
So legal advice say that the report could not be used to deal with the public servants?
No.
Or did it say it was
The
only-
lawyers don't tell you what you can do. You know, you could always make a fool of yourself. The lawyers tell you what the legal position is, and the legal position is that this report is improperly concluded and it is unusable for the purposes of third-party use. If I make that report public and the report contains slander of an individual, the individual could sue me.
I'm not talking about this publication. I'm picking up Anthony's question about
About the public, there were shortcomings on the part of public officials, and I said earlier on, the reason why having dismissed the minister, which is the ultimate sanction against a minister, depending on whatever he's done, the reason why I went further to have the report done by this three-man team, three-woman, right? Three-person team, was so that we could get the whole picture, because there were other people involved, and the other people wasn't just the minister. There were a lot of public officials. In fact, there were the whole issue had crossed two PSs. It involved an in-house lawyer giving in-house legal advice. There was external professional lawyer. There was recourse to the industrial court. So it was a fairly complex situation. And this report was meant to pull all of this together. Right? But for me, it would have been nothing new, because I had already taking the action, because I was satisfied that the minister's conduct was not what I expected of him when he was appointed.
was any action taken against
The public servants?
Yes.
There was one transfer of I think there was it influenced the transfer of a permanent secretary, but there was nothing else that was done, because whatever the public officials had done that was found to be wrong was based on advice coming to them from, But again, I said I don't want to appear to be using the report in this way, but just to say that I was aware that there wasn't much more that we could have done.
You have outlined Prime Minister.
Right, there's no process now. The process was ended. We tried to get a report. The report turned out to be a legal conundrum, because it couldn't be used, and I was quite happy to leave it that way. If it was the report was required by me to determine what to do with the minister, then I would have had to continue doing something. But I didn't think I have to wait on a report based on the standards I set and based on what I thought was necessary at the time.
With the report, the letter that was sent with the report to Mr. Smith, did it ask for his response?
Yes. That was the permanent secretary's letter. I can't recall seeing that letter, but I was advised by the permanent secretary that he had sent the report to Mr. Smith and had requested of him. And then the next thing I knew was that. No, Mr. Smith never responded. His lawyer responded, challenging the legality of the report. So there was no response from Mr. Smith to the content of the report.
Okay, so what is to prevent, is there a clear policy with respect to sexual harassment now? And how, if it is against a minister, how is it to be handled? Or is this matter just dead and
We have, as a matter of fact, the Minister of Labour has done a lot of work, and we have a comprehensive sexual harassment. No, well, I mean, I don't know that the conduct of a minister, separate and apart from anybody else, is a matter for the Prime Minister. There wouldn't be a clause in there, in the sexual harassment policy about a minister. I mean, there'll be no...
non-disclosure agreement that disguises...
No, that non-disclosure agreement is not... The non-disclosure aspect, again, that was part of the legal involvement, which, again, I'm told, in matters of this nature, where that's a standard practice It is not to hide anything on this particular case. It is something that the lawyers would put in there in matters of that nature. So I don't know that that was special to this particular thing.
You see, that's why we call a cover-up, because there was what they say is that there was a concerted plot to sanitize what we claim.
Well, those are interpretations. I can't prevent anybody from interpreting it like that. But I'm saying a non-disclosure clause, in many instances, I have dealt with a major situation here as Prime Minister in a much larger situation where there was a settlement, and it involved public interest. And in the settlement, where all parties were agreed that this is a settlement, it carried a non-disclosure clause. It doesn't mean that you are covering up anything.
But the bottom line is, where does the money come from for non-disclosure to pay? Where does the money come from? The public purse?
The money comes, who normally pays when public servants I told you earlier on, the person who was dismissed was improperly dismissed by public servants. Once I tell you that, it's public money is at risk. Because if the person was dismissed improperly from the public service and a compensation had to be paid. In fact, last week a judge was saying that police officers ought to be made to pay when they do something wrong. We're not there yet, because the bottom line is, if public officials fall short and create liabilities, they create it for the taxpayer. As a matter of fact, it might have been, I'm not sure if it was the Attorney General who was sued, or would have been sued or something like that. But there's public liability when public servants fall short. That is not news. And if the legal completion carries a non-disclosure clause, which is nothing new, it doesn't have to be interpreted as a cover-up. But if there are persons who want to interpret it that way, then so be it. But what exactly are they covering? There's nothing being covered up. From the beginning, this information was available in the public domain. Right? And if anybody else knows that something is being covered up, then so be it. Let them find it, and then we'll discuss it when it comes up.
But the Cabinet never approved the payment, or it
No,
never
but this was not a matter that was before the Cabinet. This matter was never before the Cabinet. This was a matter at a ministry. The ministry had its in-house legal advice, complaint from the minister that the person is not functioning, the person should be terminated. They proceeded to try to terminate the person, terminated them improperly, and create a liability once they do that. Then, of course, the person who was terminated said, I'm being terminated and I'm making a complaint of wrongdoing on the part of the minister. Then the ministry looked for legal advice, and it then became a legal matter concluded in that way. And from where I start, from all that I've seen, everything that is involved in there is in the public domain. I know of nothing else. You today have published what you've seen. I know of nothing else other than that. But I just want to make it quite clear that there's no attempt to hide anything. Yes.
Prime Minister, I think the words cover-up came in the 4-page letter that the gentleman who at the time was the permanent secretary to the office of the Prime Minister sent to Mr. Smith.
Yes.
And I think that is what the
Let me add it again. The person who sent anything to Mr. Smith was the permanent secretary, who would have sent him the report by the 3 persons.
The cover letter has, according to the reports today, the allegation that there was a cover-up.
Yeah.
Saying to Mr. Smith that there was something being covered up in his ministry, I
think the allegation of cover-up refers to the fact that the former personal assistant to the minister was fired without her harassment case being heard. And you've just told us that she was fired without process.
I don't know that aspect of it. Fired without process, I know. That's why I said she brought a claim for being fired, and that what turned out is that she was fired without her being involved in the decision. She was unaware that she was being fired for non-performance. That was a shortcoming on the part of the public officer who fired her. Okay? there was then an allegation attached to that, that there was misconduct on the part of the minister towards her. That is also known. The minister has not responded to that, and more so, the minister was not given an opportunity to respond to that. But I'm saying, whatever that is, the minister was dismissed from his office. Right? Because whatever the relationship the minister had with her, whatever the relationship she had with him, the bottom line is, from where I sat, the minister's involvement in resulting in that termination resulted in the minister being dismissed. So if you're saying that the PS told the minister that there was a cover-up somewhere in the system there, that is what this report was meant to elucidate. And I think it probably did, because people were interpreting things differently. And there were also people who had done things and were putting it in a particular way. For example, if you have the responsibility to dismiss the person, and the person was dismissed and there's a decision being made that the dismissal is improper, then you are exposed for having done that. And that is not anything to run away from.
So, Prime Minister, this entire situation unveils not one, but at least two situations of a failure of natural justice by former permanent secretary and current high-level permanent secretary.
Well, unfortunately, I think that is a correct assessment, yes, because the officer who was fired at the Ministry of Sport, the reason why the ministry had a liability to pay is because the officer was improperly dismissed. It was not that the minister, that the ministry paid for the minister's misconduct, sexual harassment. That is not it. The officer, when they proceeded to dismiss the officer, for cause or without cause, the action of dismissing the officer was improperly done. And you know, if you are dismissed from your place of work improperly, who dismissed you has created a liability which you can make claim against. The second time, you're right, which is when the report was done, Mr. Smith was not asked to have an input before the findings were made. And again, what the senior counsel is pointing out, I know lawyers talk, that they went too far, meaning that maybe they could have gone to a certain point with what they had found without drawing the conclusions that they had drawn. Because once you draw conclusions and attach it to people, then you have made findings, and then you now run afoul of, was the person made aware that you were making these findings?
So the question is, was the former personal assistant terminated to cover up the allegation of harassment?
I don't know that that was so. What I know at the time when he dealt with me, when he was demoted, was that he had put to the permanent secretary that the contract should be terminated because the person wasn't working. And the person was then, that instruction having been given, the person was then terminated, and then the person complained about the termination. So at that stage, he got into trouble with me because I thought that he had created an environment which ought to have been avoided. So it was a wrongful dismissal suit. The question with Mr. Kwamina was, how much is this person entitled to? The person was making a claim for a certain figure. They went to an expert to determine what they can get away with in terms of settling a claim of wrongful dismissal. That's what it is.
That for those who don't understand the public service process, does that have to go to the cabinet? Or that
No. This has nothing to do with the cabinet. As a matter of fact, this was entirely the Prime Minister dealing with the minister, because as you know, it is only the Prime Minister that can hire or fire a minister, right? So the Prime Minister, yes. The rest of it is all in the Ministry of Sport. There was no cabinet note, there was no issue before the cabinet. This had nothing for the cabinet to adjudicate on. Right? So this is Prime Minister, what did you do about the minister? He was fired. Permanent secretary, why did you do this? I had legal advice. The legal advice may have been flawed, but it wouldn't be the first time that a piece of flawed legal advice should have been given. And of course, there would have been a situation where one could say, but at least with your experience, you might have been able to see that this was not the way to go. But those are the facts. Yes, there was an attorney. The committee was a very well-balanced committee. But as I said, you know, the senior counsel advised to the Attorney General. Sometimes, no. I only see legal advice that's destined from my eyes.
Prime Minister, the senior counsel who gave the Attorney General advice in this matter?
I wouldn't know that you have to ask the AG that. I don't speak for the Attorney General. And I told you, I'm very circumspect where the legal side of the government is involved. The Attorney General, if you do get a hold of him, he might be able to tell you, I know that the Attorney General reported to me that he got senior counsel advice on the issue, and the senior counsel advice confirms his own advice. So that's where it is. So I'm comfortable that there was proper advice and that we are acting against the background of sound advice. There was one comment that was made by a particular person who shall remain nameless, that the Prime Minister is not being honest. And I would leave my comment on that to when I speak to the person directly, face to face. You see, because I don't have to run and lie about anything. You lie when you're afraid of the consequences. Right? And I have never made it my business to lie to the public as Prime Minister. I understand that the problem that some people have is that they've been lied to so long and have told so many lies themselves that when they're spoken to and the truth is made, it looks too difficult to swallow, too easy. Yes, Clint?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out Mr. Corman question. This is Mr. Michael Corman, I guess?
Yes.
So I see he was solicited to get advice in this matter from Mr. Smith. How was he paid exactly? Was that tax?
Well, I wouldn't know. I mean, that is a matter between Mr. Smith and his lawyer, Mr. Corman and his client, and I will not prejudge or expect to put myself in that. Those are matters you can put to them if you talk to them. But I'm not going to go outside the limit. I am not, Mr. Corman is an expert HR lawyer. He and his clients, that's he and his client's business. There's no rule there for me.
Sorry, did the minister retain or did the ministry retain?
I am not clear on that. I don't know who retained who. But I know that the ministry went outside for legal advice, and I don't know. He couldn't have been acting on both sides. So somebody retained Mr. Kwamina.
This particular story came out, some questions have been raised out there as to whether Mr. Kwamina's rule in this was a proper one, considering where he is now, his current position.
That is just rubbish. Mr. Kwamina is a very experienced human relations lawyer who is used by all persons of all ilk in this country. And getting involved in this particular matter in no way casts any aspersion on the integrity of Mr. Kwamina.
Because you had appointed the committee, of course.
Yes.
This was after you had taken the actions.
I took action against Mr. Smith on the same day that it came to my attention that this problem was festering at his portfolio. And I did so by calling him in, speaking to him, and deciding that there was something that I had to do. And then subsequent to that, on further investigation, as I told you this afternoon, I took further action against him. So there was never any hesitation on my part to do what I had to do.
Let's say the committee had done its work. It was supposed to have done. There were no issues involved. What then would have been the result, depending on the outcome?
If what?
Because the committee, as you had said, it operated in a flawed manner in terms of not speaking with Mr. Smith. I'm just wondering, what would have been the ultimate conclusion?
I mean, had the committee not found this report so vitiated, we would have had a report. And that report, I mean, could have been available in one way or the other, one place or the other. There would have been a report. As far as I'm concerned, no, there's no report to work with. Right? That's what it is.
It says something that Mr. Smith never responded to any of the allegations in the report, but instead merely sort of took a legal
No,
position.
but again, that is for you to draw your own conclusion on. But Mr. Smith took his legal position where he had a position to take. I mean, if you are the target of an investigation and your lawyer tells you that what has been done is injurious to you, I would think that you would shelter in that shade.
Have you spoken to the members of the committee who submitted a report that you have described as useless?
Not me. I'm not a lawyer. The lawyers have determined the report to have gone too far, and on that basis, I can't use it. I've spoken, I mean, these are people who I interact with all the time, so I interact with them, but it's just unfortunate that this outcome, I'm sure when they submitted their report, they didn't expect that this would have been the outcome, and I'm sure there was no malice involved. It's just that there's no line drawn on the ground, and there were no, there were no words that were forbidden, and I thought they were doing a good job. Sometimes you think you're doing something good and it turned out to be the opposite.
Have you had any direct conversation with Mr. Smith or heard directly from him outside of this process?
I had all the direct conversations I needed with Mr. Smith at the time when I took action against him.
And you did say, Prime Minister...
Because I saw nothing else to want me to talk to him about the matter after that. Because I had done, as I said, the ultimate that I could do with him.
You did say, of course, as Prime Minister, in terms of a cabinet appointment, you have that authority to act, and you did, as you said. He's a present MP of the PNM right now, an elected official, but there's a general election coming up. What do you say to those in terms of... That's
the matter for the constituency of Diego Martin West. Sorry. Diego Martin, you see, once you say Diego Martin, you automatically go to the west, right? No, Diego Martin Central. The way we operate in the party, the selection or rejection of a candidate, incumbent or otherwise, is a long process that starts with the constituents of the relevant constituency. So it will be up to them to decide how they react to all of it. So we're not there yet.
Any thoughts on this whole issue on former personal assistant of Mr. Smith in terms of this process and explored process and so on?
Well, I thought I was giving all my thoughts already. I give you a lot of thoughts. So it's for you to express your thoughts now. Yes.
Upon Jewel, does somebody need to actually write down a checklist for when inquiries are being done? You have the basic natural justice, the right of reply, because this is the umpteenth time that we've been here, as you said, in live sport, and even before that, a case in which you yourself have personal knowledge of.
It's been written down. I mean, the fact that you are quoting it now, you would have got it from somewhere. These things tend to have a life of their own at the time. Each situation is unique, and people see things differently. I'm sure when they did that report, they did not think that they were doing it badly. And someone come after and look at it and say, listen, you having said this, you should probably have waited, and that's what it is.
So haven't we actually sort of found ourselves in a situation whereby, okay, Mr. Smith has never responded to the claims against him, but you just have this gray area just hanging there about were there actual sexual harassment allegations? Were they real or were they not real? One walks away not being sure whether this is fact or not.
Well, maybe if you talk to Mr. Smith, he might have a story to tell you. I can't speak for him. And whether there was or whether there wasn't, the bottom line is that he has paid the ultimate price for being in that situation.
Mr. Smith as MP?
As MP representing the people who elected him, yes, he's been functioning as MP since then, but he's not functioning as a minister. There are two different jobs, and one of which he's not functioning in. And as MP, as you know, the removal of a person from Parliament is not a prerogative of the Prime Minister. So I don't know that there's any point in going beyond that at this stage. Thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you again sometime soon.